Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections, along with the daily mains answer writing program. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the geophysical phenomena of glacial lake outburst floods, its meaning, the measures taken, and the way forward. Then in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the serious public safety issue of stampedes in India, the related challenges, and the way forward. Then in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026 along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to glacial lake outburst floods, commonly known as GLOF events. Nature knows no boundaries, and the effects of climate change, or I should rather say, the ill effects of climate change are visible across countries, across boundaries. One of the greatest manifestation of the anthropogenic climate change or the human-induced climate change is the rising instances of GLOF events. In that regard, we have this particular column which has been published in the Hindu, which says that on 8th of July, we had 2 simultaneous GLOF events taking place in the country of Nepal, and the source region were Tibet in China. Now, this obviously led to huge devastation. Now, what you have to understand is that this particular Himalayan region, it spreads across the countries of Pakistan, Afghanistan, China, India, Nepal. And this particular region is highly prone to these GLOF events. Once these GLOF events happen, it leads to great devastation and the loss of life and property. So what we'll see is, first of all, that what is a glacial lake? Second, what are the factors which lead to the formation or the events of GLOFs? See, we already know that one of the aggravating factors is climate change, right? We'll see and we'll look into the other factors as well. Then we'll see what are the measures taken by the government of India in order to mitigate these events and what should be the way forward. Believe me, this topic is very important, especially from the perspective of this year's mains and from the perspective of GS1 geophysical phenomena and GS3 disaster management. Now, let's first talk about what do we mean by glacial lake. See, we know that we usually talk about the term glacier, which is nothing but the river of ice. Once a glacier recedes or once it melts, it causes deep depressions because of the frictions. And these deep depressions, they are filled in with the melt water. And then it leads to the formation of glacial lake. Now, because of the friction taking place, there is a huge loose unconsolidated debris of rocks which is accumulated, what we generally refer to as the moraines. So what are moraines? Moraines are the unconsolidated debris which are a product of the friction because of the glacier, right? Now, we have this lateral moraine, what we call as the boundary, which forms the boundary of this particular glacial lake. Now, once the water is increasing in the glacial lake, obviously its pressure is going to increase on the wall, on the boundary, which is nothing but the lateral moraine. And once the pressure bearing capacity of the lateral moraine is exceeded, it will breach, it will break down, and ultimately the water would come out. And this water would inundate the downstream areas, the valley areas, and ultimately it would lead to the floods, what we generally refer to as flash floods. I hope it is clear. So this is the whole process by which the GLOF events take place. So we have the glacial lakes, often damped. They're bounded by the moraines or ice, which are unstable because of the loose unconsolidated debris, right? And these disaster events, they take place as the boundary breaks up, and ultimately you have the abrupt discharge of water, ultimately resulting into GLOF events, glacial lake outburst floods, right? Now this can be triggered by various events. One of the reasons which I already told you is the climate change. See, formation of glacial lakes is a natural process. But because of the climate change, we are witnessing the rise in the average temperature. So the pace at which these glacial lakes are being formed, it is increasing. Once the glacial lakes, the number of glacial lakes will increase, obviously the number of GLOF events would also increase. Then we have earthquakes. How? The Himalayan region, we all know, plays in a highly sensitive tectonic zone, what we call as seismic activity, right? Now, once the earthquake takes place, it results into the instability of these glacial lakes and ultimately the breakage of these boundaries, these moraines, and you have these GLOF events. Then it can be because of glacial calving. Look at this. Let's say we have a particular glacial or a big piece of ice and it's jumping into this particular glacial lake. Ultimately, you have the water coming out, right? outburst of the flood, and this can also be a reason, right? Next, we have the breakage of terminal moraine, I already discussed. Now, these GLOFs, what they ultimately do is they unleash large volume of water in the downstream areas and sediment and debris downstream. Now, because of the sediment and debris, what usually happens is that the rivers, their carrying capacity is reduced. That is, the water which they are carrying is reduced because the bed of the rivers, it is basically filled with the silt, which is basically brought by these glacial floods. Now, look at this. The article itself provides this. Almost 2/3 of the GLOF events are triggered by ice avalanches or landslides because of this. Once the rock or once the piece of ice falls into the lake, ultimately you have the discharge of the water, and the remaining due to the excessive meltwater pressure on the weak moraine dams and earthquakes. I hope it is clear. Now, why we have these GLOFs which are under the spotlight? We have the National Remote Sensing Center of the ISRO, which says that the Indian Himalayan region, it comprises of 11 river basins and almost 28,000 glacial lakes. See, the number of glacial lakes is increasing, right? I already told you the reason. Because of the climate change, the rising temperatures, and ultimately we have the increasing number of glacial lakes. This has resulted into the rise in the GLOF events. And this was witnessed in 2013, what we usually term as the Kedarnath catastrophe, right? And in 2021, the Chamoli disaster, right? Both of them were a result of the GLOFs. Now, in India's case, the article says we have these glacial lakes being primarily categorized into two ways. First is the supraglacial lakes. Once we have a big glacier and it completely melts, we have the formation of big glacial lakes, right? Then we have the moraine damped lakes. See, we have this particular glacier, right? And the end of this particular glacier is known as the snout or the toe of the glacier. And at the end, we have the meltwater, right? So we have the presence of glacier along with the glacial lake, and this is bounded by the moraine. Once the pressure of the water exceeds, it results in the breakage of this particular boundary, and ultimately we have these GLOF events. So these are nothing but moraine damped lakes, right? What is the scientific evidence to prove that the GLOF events are increasing? According to the journal Nature, it says that because of the climate change, and the report was published in the year 2021, it says that there has been almost 53% increase in the number of glacial lakes since 1990s. Now, I already told you, once the number of glacial lakes would increase, obviously the number of GLOF events would also increase, right? One of the most important examples is the instance of October 2023 in Sikkim, right? So we had the GLOF event taking place in South Lonak Lake in Sikkim. And we had this Chungthang Dam, right? It was made using almost $2 billion, and it had a capacity of 1250 megawatt. Now, it was completely washed away, completely destroyed. You can just see that it also results into the loss of huge property, right? Along with the life. So as I told you, we have the soaring global temperatures, and because of that, what we see is the rising average temperatures around the world, and ultimately we have the increasing number of glacial lakes, and ultimately we have the rising GLOF instances. And then we have rapid infrastructure development. How is this basically contributing to these crises? See, we have some of these strategic projects going on in the country at the border areas. For example, the Char Dham project or the strategic projects at the India-China border, right? Now, once these projects take place, definitely it creates instability in the land. And ultimately, we have the increasing instances of these events, right? Now, the Nature journal in 2023 says that almost 15 million people in the Himalayan region, they are affected because of these GLOF events. Almost 1.5 crores. And out of these, we have almost 5 million people in the South Asia region comprising of Afghanistan. We have countries like Pakistan, India. They are affected because of these events, right? Particularly in the Tibet and the China-Nepal border, which is obviously the point of concern in the present article also. So these are the prime two locations. We have the Tibet area, the southeastern Tibet, and the China-Nepal border, right? Now, this is but obvious. If we'll have any crisis in Nepal with respect to the GLOF events, the water would come into the downstream areas, and it would ultimately flood the areas in India. So it is obviously a concern for India as well. Now, what are the risk factors which are primarily responsible for the increasing instances of GLOF? The very first is climate change, already discussed. According to the International Meteorological Department, we have the year 2023 and 2024 as the hottest year of the planet. And ultimately, once we'll have so much warmth and so much heat, we'll have the rising instances of GLOF events. And therefore, we'll have the glacial melt and ultimately these GLOF events. Then we have the monitoring challenges. What is this? See, most of these glacial lakes, they are at an altitude of more than 4,500 meters, right? 4,500 meters. Now, they are only approachable in the months of summer. We can only go and install the weather systems in the months of summer. Except that what we can use is the remote sensing through the satellites. So what you have to understand is that the real-time data is not available, primarily because the conditions are extreme. The weather is extreme and it is not really possible to basically go there and mount the manual weather monitoring systems, right? It's a short window of few months in the summer and the terrain is very rigid, right? And weather station absence is there primarily because it's very difficult to basically manually plant the weather stations over there. Next is the remote sensing. See, what we are trying to say is that right now we are not having those weather stations which can give us the real-time data from these locations. We are dependent upon the remote sensing from the satellite, the data from the remote sensing, and it gives us the post facto data. Now, again, this is not something which is a real-time data. So therefore, the interventions which would be based upon the data, they are lacking, right? Not early warning systems are installed in these places. Next is the rising flash floods. See, I already told you about the Sikkim disaster of 2023. Once this particular GLOF event happened, it led to the coming out of large amount of unconsolidated loose rocks, the silt in the downstream areas, and that silt got deposited in the Teesta river, and ultimately it reduced the carrying capacity of this particular river, right? So this is again a cause of concern. Then we have the aspect of cascading disaster. See, we all must have heard about 2013 Kedarnath crisis, which we often say that was a result of the cloudburst. But what you have to understand is that it was primarily because of the Chorabari glacial melt, the GLOF event which happened at the Chorabari, and then it was aggravated by the cloudburst, and ultimately we had the flash floods and we had so much of devastation, right? Next, we have the absence of innovative technology. See, right now we are working upon that. Right now we are having many programs. We are basically investing a lot of amount of money in the technology, in the other things. But still what we see is in comparison to the other countries, the developed countries, we're not having the technology. And there is absence of private players in this particular aspect. Only we have, for example, the ISRO or the other organizations which are contributing to the overall data. Otherwise, there is lack of private participation. Now, what have been the mitigation measures which have been taken in India? See, the very first is that under the overall guidance of the National Disaster Management Authority, there has been the constitution of the Committee on Disaster Risk Reduction. Now, initially, we had this particular approach of post-disaster management. Right now, we are having a shift towards a proactive policy, where we are focusing upon the mitigation measures required so as to avert that particular disaster. That's the first thing. So under that particular overall approach, we have the National Glacial Lake Outburst Floods Risk Mitigation Program, and it is a multi-stakeholder approach. That is, we are integrating the views of the state governments, who are ultimately the most important stakeholder. Then we are integrating the views of the research institutes, the students, the researchers, and it is a multi-stakeholder approach. Now, under this program, there has been a list has been created of 195 high-risk glacial lakes, and the focus is upon those glacial lakes so as to mitigate or avert those disasters. Next, we have the International Center on Integrated Mountain Development, which is primarily doing the research in the Hindu Kush mountain range, Hindu Kush Himalayan mountain range, and coming up with various reports and data, right? Next aspect is that of remote sensing, and the data is being used by the Central Water Commission. Now, what you have to understand is that through this program, we are also focusing upon, again, increasing or integrating technology. And one of the most important aspect is the SAR interferometry, the synthetic aperture radar interferometry. What usually happens in this is that through the satellites, what we are doing is we are taking the periodic images, the radar images, and then it is being compared. The images are being compared to the level of almost 10 centimeters. Right, so if there's a movement of ice, it would capture that. So again, there is the integration of technology in it. You must have also heard about the recent initiative of NISAR, right? The satellite, NASA and ISRO, synthetic aperture radar. It would also help in basically mitigating these crises because it would provide us with the credible data. Next, we have the state disaster management authorities. For example, in Arunachal Pradesh, the state disaster management authority has carried out significant work when we talk about the Tawang area, right? Or let's talk about Uttarakhand, right? Definitely, we have the contribution of SDMAs also. Then we have the scientific expeditions. Scientific expeditions at different places in the Union territories of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh and the states of Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand and Arunachal Pradesh. Now, these scientific expeditions, they are integrating the local population also. And again, as I said, there has been integration of technology. For example, bathymetry. What is bathymetry? To basically measure the depth of these lakes, right? Then we have the electrical resistance tomography, ERT, right? What happens through this particular technology is that we are able to understand that to what level the ice cores are made up of. That is, you have a glacier, right? What is the level of the ice cores in the glaciers, right? So as to know the strength of ice cores and these moraines. Then we have slope surveys. So as to know that are these slopes in a condition of stability or not. That is what you have to understand. One more thing which I would like to add here is that we have these 5 objectives which are enshrined in the National GLOF Risk Mitigation Program. The very first is hazard assessment of these areas. Second is installing the advanced weather and water stations to these locations. We already saw that because of the absence of these stations at these locations. Why? Because of the extreme weather conditions, we have to rely upon the satellite data. But now we are integrating, we are trying to basically manually put these stations over there. Then we have the establishment of the early warning systems so as to make sure that the downstream areas, the valley areas, they have proper information. Then mitigating the risk. How we can mitigate the risk? Drawing down the water level. See, let's say we have this particular calving of glacier and ultimately you have coming off the water outside. Or let's say there is breakage of the moraines. There have to be the installation of early warning system so as to make sure that the people in the downstream areas, they have sufficient time with them so that they can be rehabilitated to different locations. That is what you have to understand. Then we have the retention structures. Retention structures on the basis of which we can draw down the water. If the water is exceeding, there has to be a structure which can basically take down the water from the upper levels to the lower levels, right? Through these retention structures. Then we have the community engagement, most important aspect, because we have to integrate the local community in order to make sure that they are the real stakeholders. They are the people who are the most affected. So you will have to go for the community engagement. That is what you have to understand. These are also important, very important, especially from the prelims. Now, what should be the measures which should be taken? The very first is early warning system. There has to be robust implementation and installation of these early warning system. Continuous monitoring of the water levels in these glacial lakes, continuous monitoring of the pressure bearing capacity of these moraines. Are they in a state to bear the capacity, right? Capacity or to bear the pressure of these glacial lakes. Then we have establishing the robust early warning systems, and they should be handled or they should be managed by people who are having sufficient technical capacity, right? Real time. The example can be taken from Bhutan. Bhutan has established a very robust system and this is giving real-time information. So again, the case study can be from Bhutan. Second is structural measures. What we are trying to say is that there has to be the construction of dams or a diversion channel. We already studied. If the water level is exceeding, there has to be a diversion channel which can divert the excess water so that there is not more pressure on these walls, on these moraines, right? Protective barriers or embankments, making sure that these glacial lakes, they are protected by these strong embankments. Strengthening of the moraine dam, same. Community preparedness, developing and practicing evacuation plans. Ultimately, it is, as I told you, it's the community which suffers. So they should be trained that if this particular event happens, what you should do. Mock drills should be done. There should be proper training with respect to how to basically manage if a particular situation of this sort arises, right? And conducting the public awareness campaigns with respect to, and again, as I said, that in states like Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, we are now having these expeditions, scientific expeditions, and it is what we are focusing upon is integrating the local people so that they can believe in the scientific work and they can then do what these people are saying, right? Next is the climate change mitigation. So what we are trying to say is that we have to basically reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, come up with various mitigation strategies, because as I told you that we have, because of the increase in the rise in temperatures, we have the increasing number of glacial lakes and therefore subsequent increase of the GLOF events. So climate change has to be mitigated. Then we have cooperation. Trans-boundary collaboration is very, very important. As I started this particular discussion, nature knows no boundaries. So be it Nepal, be it China, and the public authorities in Nepal, they're complaining that we didn't get the sufficient information from the Chinese authorities, right? So again, this is again a very big loophole, and we need to plug in this particular gap, and there has to be a robust trans-boundary collaboration among different countries. Then there can also be the deployment of ITBP, Indo-Tibetan Border Police Force, so as to make sure that in those places where the manual installation of these systems cannot take place, the ITBP should measure that what are the changes which are taking place, and they can communicate that particular thing to the relevant authorities. So these things must be taken into account. This is again a very serious threat. GLOF events are not just affecting the property but also life, and it is a grave concern, especially in this particular Himalayan belt. And there have been a lot of these mitigation programs being taken by the government of India, but they need to be made more robust. Adequate funding needs to be given to these programs, and there has to be the integration of scientific community as well. So that is what you have to understand. Let's have the mains practice question. The Himalayan region is prone to devastating GLOF glacial lake outburst floods. Highlight the measures taken to mitigate its effect and the additional efforts required. Please do write a particular answer in this question. As I told, this is really very important, especially from the perspective of this year's mains. With reference to glacial lake outburst floods, consider the following statements. Glacial lakes are typically dammed by stable materials like ice and sediments composed of loose rocks and debris. Seismic activity can disrupt the fragile balance around glacial lakes, leading to their sudden release of water. Intense and prolonged rainfall in the region can contribute to the rapid expansion of glacial lakes, increasing the risk of GLOF events. Which of the statements is or are correct? Do give me the answer in the comment section. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to faith, fear and fatalities, stampedes in India. So very sad news coming from the state of Uttarakhand. Almost 8 people were killed in a stampede in Mansa Devi temple in Haridwar. And what is more saddening is to know is that even today, a particular stampede took place in a temple in the state of Uttar Pradesh and 2 people have died. Now what you have to understand is that these instances of stampedes have been of recurring nature. And it's a very serious public safety issue. And what is to be blamed is, and what is to be understood is, that all these stampedes incidents are a result of human errors, right? For example, we had the very tragic incident in Sabrimala in the year 2011. Almost 102 people died. Then we had a particular incident in 2016 in a political rally in Gandhi Maidan in Patna. Almost 30 people died. Then we had many deaths in the Kumbh Mela, right? And just in the month of May, we had a particular gathering in the state of Goa. Almost 30 people died over there. So these instances have been recurring. And also according to the National Crime Records Bureau, NCRB, what it says is that from the year 1996 till the year 2021, there have been almost more than 4,000 instances of stampedes. And more than 3,000 people have succumbed because of these stampedes. 3,000 people, more than 3,000 people have died because of these stampedes. So we'll see what this particular stampedes are all about, what are the reasons, what are the causes, and what should be the way forward. Again, a very important topic, especially from the perspective of disaster management. Now, what is a stampede? See, stampede is nothing but a disorderly movement of people, right? So you have a group of people standing together, and suddenly you have the outburst, suddenly you have the disorderly movement of people, and ultimately you have this stampede situation. So disruption of the orderly movement of the crowds. And ultimately, when you have this stampede-like situation, it leads to huge injuries and fatalities. Sometimes these stampedes are also a result of a response of a perceived danger. Let's say you have a particular situation where there is a rumor. For example, in this particular instance, there was a rumor that there is a particular wire, a snapped electrical line. So there can be a rumor, and ultimately as a response mechanism, there is a panic among people, right? And therefore you have this stampede-like situation. Loss of physical space. See, in these stampedes, what we have generally observed is that there is a very restricted passage. It's a very small space over there. So ultimately, if the space is less, the chances of stampedes are more, right? If there are passages which are very narrow in nature, then obviously you'll have more number of deaths and fatalities. Or to will to attain something. What do we mean by a will to attain something? What you have to understand is, first of all, that more than 80% of stampedes in the country, which have taken place in India, they have taken place in a sort of a religious gathering, right? And in the religious gathering, what you observe is that people have a tendency to basically, for example, touch the preachers. If there's a preacher giving sermons telling about life or something, right? So there's a tendency among people to touch his feet. For example, in Hathras, you must be aware what happened, that you had so many people who gathered over there, and you had this particular religious preacher. Once he was walking, once he went away, people basically started to come and push each other because they wanted to collect the soil on which that particular preacher walked. So that is a kind of craze which people have, will to attain something, and therefore you have this particular instance of stampede. Now we have the National Disaster Management Authority, which has basically talked about how this particular stampedes take place, the process of the stampede. See, what it says is that what are the causes of stampedes? First of all, it can be because of the structural failures, that is the makeshift facility or the facility over where the event is happening, or for example, let's say the stage or the roof, it might collapse. You must have heard about a very important concert, a music concert which was taking place in Dominican Republic, and overall the roof collapsed, right? Because it was fragile, it was weak, and ultimately more than 200 people died in Dominican Republic, right? So it can be because of the structural failures. Next, you can have human errors, rumors, for example, right? Next, we can have natural calamity. For example, let's say you have gathering of the people and all of a sudden you have the floods or you have the earthquake which occurs and there's a panic among people, and therefore there can be stampedes. Now, this is again added by the other factors, for example, the attendance level. That is the number of people who are participating in the instance. If the number of people is more, obviously the chances of casualties would be more. Then you have the action by the performer. Let's say you have a particular music concert where you have the singer, the performer, or you have a religious preacher in a religious gathering. So the actions of that particular performer, that greatly induces what the people are going to do. And therefore, sometimes because of the sheer excitement among the people, you have this particular instance which take place. Improper or inadequate arrangement. This has been one of the most important reasons. The arrangements have not been proper. Now, because of these two things, what happens is there is a panic or excitement which is created in the minds of the people, and ultimately it leads to the condition of crowding. NDMA also talks about 4 important factors, which is FIST. The very first is force. That is the kind of force exerted by the people on each other, right? Now, obviously, if the space is less, the force would be more. Next is information. There can be the spread of rumors. For example, in this particular instance, there was a rumor about the electric snapped wire, or there can be a rumor about that, there's a bomb over there, right? Or something like that, any rumor. So information plays a very important role. Then we have space. Again, if the space is constricted, if the space is less, obviously the chances of stampede would be more. In an open space, in an open playground, the chances would be relatively less. Then we have time. This is again very important. The duration for which that particular thing happens, that particular event which happens, is also the factor. If the duration is more, the number of casualties would be more. If the duration is less, obviously the casualties would be less. All these factors combined lead to the thing of overcrowding. Now, once the overcrowding takes place, it leads to the crush disasters. That is, people basically find themselves suffocating, right? People are crushed, and ultimately because of the compressive asphyxia, lack of oxygen, things happen. Then it can also be because of the suffocation, lack of oxygen. Oxygen is not there, and it's a whole completely closed environment, so there can be suffocation. Next aspect can be the higher desired velocity. Let's say you have people standing and pushing against each other and it's all a closed environment, then you can have suffocation. But let's say you have people who are moving and pushing against each other. There's a velocity which is there. In this situation, what happens is the vulnerable population, especially the children and the women, they get trapped on the ground, and you have people walking over them. And their vital organs, for example, their heart, their chest, or their face, it is trampled by the people. And ultimately, it leads to the death of the people. So they are trampled disasters. That is what the overall process of stampede is all about. Now, if you just look at these instances, for example, in Allahabad, in the year 1954, we had 800 people who were killed. And in the recent Kumbh Mela also, we had the fatalities because of these stampedes. Then we have Naina Devi, for example, 146 people were killed. Haridwar, almost 50 people were killed in 1986. Then we have Patna, 32. Then we have Kolkata, Rajamundry. We have Sabrimala, 102 people in 2011. We have Satara, almost 340 people died. We have Jodhpur, 224 people killed. So these instances have been recurring. And recently what we have seen is the more number of these instances. Now, what is primarily the reason? If I were to tell you the reasons, they are primarily two. The very first is negligence. That is negligence of these event organizers. It can be the political party, it can be the religious preacher, or whatever. They are negligent about that what we are going to do if some situation of this sort happens. What are the arrangement measures? Second is the incapacity of the administration, incapacity of the personnel who are basically mandated to overlook these functions or events. So these are primarily the two things. First is negligence of the event organizers, and second, the incapacity of the administration. Now, major causes, the very first is structural causes. As I told you, the structural collapse which took place in Dominican Republic. So these structures, whenever we have these political rallies or we have these religious gatherings, they are done on a makeshift basis, on a temporary basis. So the structures we have, they are very fragile. They're not robust. So ultimately, when you have large crowds coming, the structures break, and ultimately you have these stampedes. Improper or unauthorized built structures. Protocols are not followed. Proper permissions are not taken from the administration. So that is one of the issues. Difficult terrain. This is very important. Most of these religious events take place on the temples, and most of these temples are situated on hilltops, on top of the hills. And the passages towards these temples, it's quite narrow in nature. So whenever sometimes you have the rumors or any other information, wrong information which is there, there's a sudden panic among the people. And ultimately you have these stampedes conditions, right? Narrow streets, absence of emergency exists. What you have to understand is that in most of these situations, there is only one exit which is there. There are no multiple exits which ideally should be there. So that is also one of the causes of concerns, right? Because all people rush towards that particular exit. Then we have fire or electricity causes. See, there can be fire in a particular makeshift facility, right? And once you'll have the fire, definitely it would create panic and craze among people, and then they would move and push against each other. Non-availability of fire extinguishers, because proper arrangements are not there, proper protocols are not being followed. Building and fire code violations. See, we have the National Building Code. Now, we are not talking about the makeshift facility. Let's leave about the temporary facilities. Even those structures which have proper, licenses and clearances with them. For example, the malls, for example, the commercial centers, they do not follow the building code. What we are trying to say is that National Building Code has to be followed by each and every of these structures. But people don't follow them. And ultimately, people do not have the adequate response mechanism, right? Illegal electric connections. Sometimes there is a short circuit, right? There can be a short circuit. There can be a fire instance, but in a particular area. But because of the panic, people push against each other. Or there can be, just imagine a particular situation where you have a lot of people gathering together. And suddenly there is a power outage. It creates completely a dark situation. Then it can lead to the panic, right? So there can be a particular situation of stampede. Faulty electric equipment. Then we have the crowd behavior. What we are trying to say is the craze. As I told you, it is because of the craze. People have the craze to touch the feet of that preacher, to basically collect the soil, to just listen to that what preacher is saying, and they push against each other. And ultimately you have these stampedes, crowd forcing entrances and on the exits, anxious and competitive crowd. They just want to outforce the other. They just want to make sure that they touch the feet of the preacher. So that is again a very grave concern. Then we have security issues. Understand, whenever you have such events, they should be properly administered. There are multiple stakeholders which should be there. For example, you have the district administration, you have the police personnel, you have the fire department, you have the medical hospitals, right? All should be having a proper approach. A stakeholder mechanism should be there. But what we see is that people don't even know. The administration sometimes is not even aware of these instances or these events which are taking place, right? Under-deployment and lack of adequate scientific planning, lack of adequate surveillance. Surveillance also plays a very important role. Even if the administration is aware about a particular event which is taking place, surveillance sometimes is not there. So you need to have these CCTV cameras or video monitoring stations so that they can know that yes, in a particular area you have situation which is going out of control, and now we need to basically manage this, right? Then we have lack of coordination among stakeholders. As I told you, there's a coordination gap between various agencies, be it the fire department, the hospitals, the district administration, the police personnel, or the event organizers also. Inadequate water and medical assistance. Even if a particular stampede incident occurs, there has to be the adequate provision of these medical supplies, emergency medical supplies, but which is not there. You must have heard about the golden hour. So in that particular period, the person can be saved if adequate CPR is given or other medical interventions are given, but that is not there, right? Or communication delays. Communication delays with respect to, let's say a particular event has happened and there are delays with respect to saying to the relevant authorities that get us the backup or get us the medical supplies. So that is one of the reasons. Now, What are the impact of such stampedes? The very first is trauma and loss. See, the manner in which the people are killed in these instances, it's very disheartening, it's very sad, right? Because people are trampled, people are suffocated. So that's a very sad situation, right? And it ultimately results into the PTSD of those who are left, their family members, post-traumatic stress disorder. And most of the members who are succumbed in these tragedies is the children and the women, right? For example, in Hathras, see, so many people died. More than, and this is just the recorded number, 121, right? The real numbers may be more. Then we have the economic hardships. What you have to understand is that majority of the people who are participating in these religious functions or gatherings or political rallies, they belong to the low socio-economic backgrounds. And once you have people who are going there and once they die, sometimes there's a loss of the breadwinner of the family, the person who is earning the money. So ultimately, there are economic hardships along with the emotional hardships. So that is a very serious cause of concern. And ultimately, it leads to the poverty. Then we have erosion of trust. See, what is the responsibility of the government or the administration? To make sure that if a particular event is happening, all the protocols are followed. To make sure that there is efficient functioning of that particular event. But when we see that these events are recurring in nature, there is the erosion of trust in the governance. People would feel that no, the administration is not capable of handling these events, right? So that is a very important and a very serious concern, I should say. Then there is the loss of social and human capital. As I told you, that most of the victims of these disasters, of this particular stampede, is the children and the women. And once you have the loss of children, it's the loss of national potential. Because these children, if they would have not succumbed, then they would have basically contributed to the nation building. So that is a very serious concern. In that regard, we have the National Disaster Management Authority coming up with the particular guideline for the state governments, local authorities, and administrators. That is managing crowds and events, venues of mass gatherings, right? Now, what should be the way forward? The very first is legislation, rules, and regulations for stampede. The Supreme Court in the Upahar cinema case very clearly said that there is a need for a particular framework, a statutory framework, a legislative framework, which defines that how the protocols have to be there. What should be the management with respect to these functions? What should be the liability with respect to these functions? If the stampedes is occurring, who should be liable for that? Including the event organizers and including the administration, right? So that is again a very important concern. Next, specialization and professionalism. What we fail to understand is, or what the administration fails to understand is, that whenever you have such situations, the response mechanism is very bad. People are not trained. The personals are not trained in order to handle such stampede-like situation. So adequate training is very important. Training and capacity building with respect to these instances is very, very important. Communication at the right time, right, is very important. Specialized personal training, safety insurance for both the event organizers and the people who are participating. Then we have use of technology, very, very important. Even when we have these gatherings taking place, there has to be proper technologies, integration of technologies in the form of the CCTV cameras or the video monitoring systems. So the administration can be aware at the real time that yes, in this particular area, what we are witnessing is sudden bursts of people. And then that can be managed through the drones or face recognition. Then we have the capacity evaluation. Capacity evaluation of the location of the structure before holding the mass gatherings. Whether the structure or the place is even capable of holding such or so many people, that has to be evaluated, right? Pre-event, these things must be done. Crowd behavior management. Stop rumors, very, very important. Similarly, in this particular instance also, there is the reason which has been pointed towards the rumors. Again, very important concern. Calm panicking crowds. You must be aware of what happened in Hyderabad. So you had this famous actor Allu Arjun coming to Sandhya Theatre and there was panic among crowds. Ultimately led to stampede and the killing of a particular woman, right? Next aspect is systematic exits. So there has to be multiple exits. It's not just about one exit. There has to be the multiple exits. Next, we have the penalties. Stricter penalties must be imposed on these event organizers, right? And their licenses must be revoked if such incidents happen regularly. Random checks and inspections must be done by the authorities, learning from global best practices. See, again, what you have to understand is that we have a lot of events which take place globally. And thousands and in fact millions of people gather, and there is very soft and very efficient management of those particular crowd. So that learning can be taken. For example, in Hajj pilgrimage we have in Makkah, where thousands of people gather, not thousands, the tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, and there is a proper, very efficient crowd management practice. Why not incorporate some of the elements from that particular thing? So what we are trying to say is that this particular thing of Stampedes, it's a purely human-made disaster, and it is primarily because of the negligence of the event organizers and the incapacity of the administration. So what we are trying to say is that it has to be averted, and proper protocols must be there, proper arrangements must be there. There has to be, before the event occurs, before the event takes place, there has to be a proper scrutiny whether all the protocols are being followed or not. So again, these are the things which you must understand. Let's have a mains practice question. Stampedes in India have frequently led to significant loss of life, particularly during religious, cultural and public gatherings. Analyze the key reasons for recurring crowd management failures in India. Suggest measures to enhance crowd management systems to mitigate such disasters in the future. Do write a particular answer in this question. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic, which is with respect to China's mega dam on Brahmaputra. Let's have the gist of the article. We have this particular river flowing in the Tibet region of China, known as Yarlung Zangpo. And via the Great Bend, over there's a particular mountain. I would be really happy if you tell me the name of the mountain in the comment section. It takes a turn and enters India in the state of Arunachal Pradesh, where it is known as Siang. And then further in the state of Assam, it is known as Brahmaputra. Now, China is constructing the world's largest hydropower project on this particular stretch of Yarlung Zangpo. And what many strategic thinkers are saying is that it can be the strategic threat for India. Why? Because in times of conflict, let's say India and China are in conflict, or let's say India is in conflict with Pakistan, China can use this particular dam for its own strategic advantage. It can release large amount of waters, and that can inundate the downstream and the valley areas in the state of, primarily in the state of Assam, and also including Arunachal Pradesh. So that is a very serious strategic threat for India. And that is the reason we have a lot of water experts, a lot of research analysts giving or telling us that what should be the way forward for India. How India can also make diversion channels, right? So again, this is important not just from the perspective of the strategic aspects, but also the geography. And we'll look at one of the very important bodies, that is the Water Development, National Water Development Authority. And we'll also see that what should be the way forward, right? So China on July 19th formally began the construction of a massive dam on Brahmaputra river close to the border of Arunachal Pradesh. You can just have a look at here. We have the Medok County in Tibet, and over at the Great Bend, we have this particular dam which is being constructed. The $167.8 billion project, generation capacity of almost 60,000 megawatt, 60 gigawatt, will be the world's largest upon completion. Since being announced in 2021, the project has raised concerns in India and Bangladesh about the impact it may have on the flow of the river. Concerns in Arunachal Pradesh, the dam on the Yarlung Zangpo, as Brahmaputra is known as Tibet, is being built at the Great Bend, where the river makes a U-turn in the Medok County before entering India at the Geling in Arunachal Pradesh. Do remember this, because many times there have been questions in the UPSC asking that which is the place, at which place the river enters in India. So just remember, Geling in Arunachal Pradesh. The river is called as Siang in Arunachal Pradesh. Arunachal Pradesh Chief Minister said that it was a potential water bomb and an existential threat. If China suddenly releases the water, our entire Siang belt would be destroyed. In the long run, Siang and Brahmaputra rivers could dry up considerably, because what China is doing is it is storing up the water, and that would affect the water flow in the downstream areas, right? So it can also lead to drought-like conditions. That is what you have to understand. In addition to the flood-like conditions if the gates are opened. Other experts have too flagged the risk of flooding due to the intentional or unintentional operation of reservoirs in Tibet. Now, this is but obvious. You have the large reservoirs, and if there is sudden discharge of water, either intentional or unintentional, it would be a cause of concern for India. An unforeseen events such as dam failure, landslides, earthquake. Tibet is a seismically active zone, and region where the dam is coming up is considered to be earthquake prone and ecologically fragile. So it's not just about the intentions of China. It's also about the seismic activity, the tectonic stability of this particular area. So this area is not tectonically stable. So if you're constructing massive dams over here, it can be a potential threat for India. Because if the earthquake occurs, it would lead to the breakage, and ultimately a lot of water would come downstream. Views from Assam. Brahmaputra is a lifeline of Assam, and it is core to its history, culture, ecology, and economy. Any significant disruption in the flow of river in the state will have far-reaching consequences. We have Assam Chief Minister said that he was not immediately worried because Brahmaputra is not dependent on single source. That is where the aspects of geography come. And in fact, the UPSC has stressed upon the tributaries of different rivers. Over here, it's very important. It gets most of its waters from Bhutan, Arunachal Pradesh, and rainwater in Assam. China contributes only 30 to 35% of the Brahmaputra's total flow. So that is what you have to understand. Look at this particular map. You have this Yalung Zangpo coming at the Great Bend in the Medak County in the part of Tibet of China. It then enters Geling in Arunachal Pradesh, and then we have Siang over here, and then multiple tributaries are there, right? So we have the left bank tributaries and the right bank. Look at this, again very important. We have the Siang, and then we have tributaries like Dibang, Lohit, Maralinsari, Dikau, Dhansari, Kopili. Then we have on that side Subansiri, Manas, Sankosh, and Tista. Do remember these. In the unlikely event of China reducing the water flow, it may actually help India mitigate the annual floods in Assam. Then we have the Indian response. New Delhi has long been monitoring the China's infrastructure interventions on the river. Ministry of External Affairs has said, as a lower riparian state with established user rights of the water of our river, we have consistently expressed our views and concerns to the Chinese side over the mega projects on the river in their territory. Then we have the Chinese Foreign Ministry again responding, saying that the project was fully within China's sovereignty. China is engaged in cooperation with downstream countries on sharing hydrological data, flood prevention, and disaster reduction. So again, this is also one of the very important concerns. China has not been regular with respect to sharing the hydrological data. And many times it is because of the non-sharing of the data that flood-like conditions have happened in countries like India, right? So that is a grave concern. We have former ambassador to China said that the project was a very large reservoir in a very difficult area, was a very risky, dangerous, and irresponsible. This is what the views of the former ambassador is. India has engaged with China in a series of confidence building measures, CBMs, after Foreign Secretary announced last October that the two sides had reached an agreement on patrolling arrangements along the line of actual control. We know that right now we are basically working on the path of de-escalation and disengagement, and we also had the Defense Minister Rajnath Singh going to China and then interacting with his counterpart, right? And therefore, we are basically focusing upon the confidence building measures, CBMs. Mitigation measures. At the heart of India's concern, as articulated by the Chief Minister Pema Khandu of Arunachal Pradesh, lies the fear that China may seek to weaponize the dam project at some stage, perhaps to build pressure on behalf of Pakistan during a future conflict. India should make scientific calculations about Chinese dam project and build its own capability to preempt any deliberate intention. We have the analysts and the researchers from different institutes, for example, the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, who have said this. Water experts say that as a mitigation strategy, India could plan storage on rivers of Brahmaputra to absorb the potential variation. So we can also come up with our own storages, right? If there's an excess water being released by China, we can store it. The storage of Upper Siang project in Arunachal Pradesh with its 300-meter high dam can serve as a buffer against variations in the flow of water, but progress has been slowed by the local resistance against the potential adverse environment impact. So here you see the challenge with respect to the dilemma, with respect to the strategic importance and the environmental concerns, right? There is a need to build more inland channels to carry the flow of excess water. The National Water Development Authority, we'll read about this, has proposed 2 links to connect the Brahmaputra and its tributaries to the Ganga basin with the aim of transferring the surplus water to the water scarce region. Look at this. We have the Ganga basin and then we have the Brahmaputra basin. What the researchers are saying, and you can also add this as a way forward, that the excess water from the Brahmaputra basin must be diverted to the Ganga basin, which has a lot of water scarce region, right? Water deficit region. So this can also be a way forward. Experts have also stressed upon the need to utilize the diplomatic channels to seek a detailed hydrological and project-related data from China in order to assess downstream impact. So there has to be the proper transparent sharing of the data. This is what India should stress in its diplomatic channels with China. India should also have conversations with other lower riparian neighbors, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and even Myanmar, on development of the coordinated protocol for advanced warning and disaster preparedness. Because as I said, nature knows no boundaries. So if the water is going to flow, definitely it would hurt the other countries also. Let's have this National Water Development Agency, very, very important body, Ministry of Jal Shakti, Department of Water Resources, River Development and Ganga Rejuvenation. Just know what this particular body is all about. This particular agency is a registered society under the Ministry of Irrigation, now known as Ministry of Water Resources, was set up in the year 1982 to carry out the detailed studies, surveys, investigations in respect of peninsular component of National Perspective Plan for Water Resource Development. You must be aware of the river interlinking projects. So it is the work of the research of the National Water Development Agency, which is primarily taken into account. Very important body, registered as a society. This is what you have to understand. You can also look at the other parts of this particular snippet taken from the website itself. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the cooperative societies. So the gist of the article is that we have a particular pressure group saying that the proposed cooperative policy is trying to snatch power from the states and it is trying to centralize the power structure. So what you have to understand is that it was the 97th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2011 which constitutionalized this concept of cooperative societies and gave a new fundamental right to form the cooperative society under Article 19, subclause 1, subclause C, and also added a directive, Article 43B, to make the functioning of the cooperative societies on a voluntary basis, more cooperative, more autonomous in nature, right? And it added Part 9B to the Constitution. But what you have to understand is that there was a very important case in 2021, Rajendra N. Shah versus Union of India, in which the Supreme Court struck down those changes which were made through the 97th Constitutional Amendment Act, which were related to the states. That is, those changes with respect to the cooperative societies made with respect to the states. What the Supreme Court said was that the amendment tries to do changes or the functioning of the cooperative societies without the consent of the states. So ideally, you should have gone with the special majority and the half of the ratification of the states, but you did not do that. So we are striking it down. So only those provisions which are with respect to the multi-state cooperative societies, they hold their validity. Rest all of the provisions have been struck down by the Supreme Court. That is what you have to understand, and a possible question in the prelims can also come. The Samyukt Kisan Morcha alleged on Sunday that the national cooperative policy unveiled by the Corporation Minister Amit Shah violates the constitution, centralizes the power and snatches the right of the state government. Policy lacks the perspective to protect the rights of the farmers, workers on livelihood, minimum support price, minimum wage and sharing of surplus. That is what the argument of this particular pressure group is all about. It urged the political parties and state governments to fight against the attack on cooperative federalism. The Union Cooperative Ministry is applicable only to the union territories and multi-state cooperative societies. In true spirit, the multi-state cooperative societies also violate the constitutional provisions regarding the cooperative societies. Now, we have the cooperative societies, Part 9B of the Constitution, right? And this was through 97th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2011. Cooperative societies fall in the list, second, the state list, the entry 32 of the state list in the 7th schedule, Article 246 of the Constitution. Hence, regulation and governance of the cooperative societies fall primarily under the jurisdiction of the state legislature. The 97th Amendment Act added Article 19, subclause 1, subclause C to the Part 3rd of the Constitution, Fundamental Rights, which made forming of cooperative societies a fundamental right to form association of unions or cooperative societies. The Amendment Act also amended Part 4, Directive Principles of State Policy, by adding a new directive, that is Article 43B. This new article directs the state to promote voluntary formation, autonomous functioning, and democratic control and professional management of the cooperative societies. By placing this in the DPSP, the Constitution gave policy direction to the state for the development of cooperative societies. Though not enforceable by courts, we know that fundamental rights are enforceable, but not the DPSPs. This provision guides the legislative and executive action. Initially, the 97th Constitutional Amendment Act inserted Part 9B. Tell me, what does 9A talks about? Tell me in the comment section. Making certain provisions mandatory for all the states. However, in the 2021 judgment, Rajendra N. Shah versus Union of India, the Supreme Court held that since cooperative societies are a state subject, the amendment should have been ratified by at least half of the state legislatures. Under Article 368 subclause 2, such ratifications was not done. Part 9B is not binding on the states for matters falling under their executive exclusive jurisdiction. It should be noted here that forming a cooperative society is a constitutional right, but being a member of the same is not a right. So if there's a statement, there's a fundamental right to form a cooperative society, and there's a fundamental right to join a cooperative societies. Obviously, the first is correct, second is incorrect. As guaranteed by the Constitution, the same is governed by the respective laws of the state related to that cooperative. The multi-state cooperatives fall in the jurisdiction of the Union Government, entry 44. Corporations, whether trading or not, with object not confined to one state of the Union list. Hence, central government can make laws regarding the same. That is what you have to understand. 32 of the state list, entry 32 of the state list, and deals with the state cooperatives. And that is the reason in Rajendra N. Shah, Supreme Court very clearly said that those provisions which the amendment tried to make with respect to the state cooperatives, they are now striked off. Only the multi-state cooperative societies provisions would be held valid. That is what you have to know. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the Computer Emergency Response Team. See, we have the Organ Retrieval Banking Organization of the AIIMS New Delhi. That is, we have a lot of organ donors, and they donate their organs, and all of their information with respect to their name, their identity, their health profile, it is given to this particular organization. One of the researchers, computer analyst, what he found was that the information which is given by these organ donors to this particular website of this organization, organ retrieval banking organization, it is not safe. You can easily access the information. Now, this obviously compromises the privacy of the people. And therefore, this particular researcher, he basically informed the computer emergency response team, and therefore the CERT basically had its own interventions, and now the data is safe. So therefore, here we'll talk about the importance of CERT-in as the organization, right? A critical vulnerability in the organ retrieval banking organization of the AIIMS New Delhi exposed sensitive data of the voluntary organ donors across India along with their identity, health profile, contact details was detected and resolved thanks to an independent security researcher who flagged the flaw. ORBO is the nodal facility for cadaver, organ and tissue donation related activities of the AIIMS. In mid-May, the researcher came across the vulnerability and alerted the computer emergency response team. In an email about the critical data exposure, he said that the vulnerability disclosed personally identifiable and medical information of the registered organ and tissue donors without any authentication mechanism for accessing it. So there was no user authentication. It was publicly available. Therefore, it was infringing the privacy of the individuals. The data leak provided unrestricted access to the complete list of organ and tissue donors registered with the AIIMS. The information included full name, residential address, and other things. Such a data breach from a reputed medical institution not only undermines the public trust in digital health systems, but also violates data protection principles under Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. The vulnerability was successfully mitigated and the exposed data was no longer publicly accessible, the researcher has said. We have the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team under the jurisdiction of Ministry of Electronics, Information and Technology. CERT-in is operational since January 2004. The constituency of CERT-in is the Indian cyber community. CERT-in is the national nodal agency responding to computer security threats and incidents as they occur. Now, what you have to understand is that the basis of the CERT-in lies in Section 70B of the Information Technology Act as it was amended in the year 2008. CERT-in has been designated to serve as a national agency to perform the following functions. First, collection, analysis, and dissemination of information on cyber incidents, forecast and alerts of cybersecurity incidents. Whenever you have a particular incident which can happen, it forecasts and it gives it information to the relevant stakeholders so that they can secure their systems. Emergency measures for handling the cybersecurity incidents, coordination of cyber incidents, response activities, issue guidelines, advisories, vulnerability notes, such other functions relating to cybersecurity as may be prescribed. Now, next we have the Right to Information Act of 2005. Now, why I'm discussing this is because we have Section 24 of the RTI Act, which says Act not to apply in certain organizations. What we are trying to say? We are saying that we have a lot of intelligence organizations and strategic organizations. For example, we have the RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, Intelligence Bureau. Now, they're not supposed to divulge the information to the public. Therefore, the central government wants, it can add any organization to Schedule 2 of the RTI Act. Right? So it says nothing contained in this act shall apply to the intelligence and security organizations specified in second schedule, being organizations established by the central government or any information furnished by such organizations to that government. But they'll have to furnish information which deals with the aspects of corruption or human rights. It was in November 2023 that CERT-in was added as the 27th organization. Right? So we have the notification of the Department of Personnel and Training, which says in the second schedule to the Right to Information Act, after serial number 26 and the entry relating to thereto, the following serial number and entry shall be inserted. Indian Computer Emergency Response Team. Now, I would be really happy if you tell me which is the 26th entry, right? So do let me know in the comment section. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to one of the very important international institutions, which is the International Telecommunications Union. So the gist of the article is that the head of the ITU has said that there is a very serious need to bring global regulations with respect to the artificial intelligence. See, we all know what is happening in the US. What President Trump is saying is that we are going to exploit a lot of fossil fuel so as to extract a lot of energy which can be used for the development and the scale up of the artificial intelligence. So in that regard, we have the head of the ITU who is saying that we need to come up with global frameworks in order to regulate and to make sure that there is the aspects of sustainable growth of the AI, right? And the benefits are equitable. That is what you have to understand. The world urgently needs to find a global approach on regulating the artificial intelligence. UN Top Tech, that is the head of the International Telecommunications Union, has said AI can actually benefit humanity, but as concerns mount over the risk posed by the fast-moving technology, including the fears of mass job losses, so there's a fear that it would replace the routine jobs and the spread of deep fakes and disinformation and society's fabric fraying becoming weak, she insisted that regulation was the key. Her comments came after US President Donald Trump this week unveiled an aggressive, low regulation strategy aimed at assuring US stays ahead of China in the AI. And that's the reason he's adopting all of these policies. ITU, International Telecommunications Union, is connecting the world and beyond as the UN Specialized Agency for Digital Technologies. They're working towards harnessing innovation and connecting everyone to ensure a better future for all. One of the very important things which you must understand is this. It is the oldest agency of the United Nations family. Just remember that, very, very important. ITU is a United Nations Specialized Agency for Digital Technologies. The organization is made up of 194 member states and more than 1,000 companies, universities, and international and regional organizations. So it's not just the countries who are a part of it. We have the other institutions and organizations also a part of it. Headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, with regional offices on every continent, ITU is the oldest agency of the UN family, connecting the world since the dawn of the telegraph in 1865. This is what you have to understand. You can also glance through the other aspects. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to the Narcotics Control Bureau. So the NCB has busted a particular syndicate which was working in the state of Rajasthan and Maharashtra, and they were illegally producing the synthetic drugs, right? So the NCB, along with the police in Rajasthan and Maharashtra, has busted the interstate drug syndicate allegedly involved in the clandestine manufacturing of synthetic drugs. Several precursors chemicals, that is the chemicals used to manufacture the drugs, including chloroform, ammonium chloride, and etc., were basically discovered to manufacture the mephedrone, were recovered from laboratory in Rajasthan's Barmer district. Let's talk about the NCB. The National Policy on Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances is based upon the directive principles contained in Article 47 of the Indian Constitution, which directs the state to bring about prohibition of the consumption except for medicinal purposes of intoxicating drugs injurious to health. The government's policy in the subject flows from the constitutional provisions, is also guided by the international conventions. India is a signatory to the Convention on Narcotics, Drugs 1961, amended by the 1972 Protocol, the Conventions on Psychotropic Substances 1971, and the United Nations Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances 1988. These are the international conventions to which India is a party. So definitely, obviously, it becomes an obligation on India to come up with a particular statutory framework. The broad legislative policies is contained in 3 central acts. The very first is Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940, Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985, the Prevention of Illicit Traffic in Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1988. In accordance to these conventions, we have adopted our own statutory framework. These are the 3 acts. The responsibility of drug abuse control, which is a central function, is carried through the number of ministries, departments, and organizations. These include the Ministry of Finance, Revenue, Department of Revenue, which has the nodal coordination as administrator of the Narcotics, Drugs, and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985, and the Prevention of Illicit Traffic in the Narcotics, Drugs, and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1988. The Narcotics, Drugs, and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985, which came into effect on this particular date, made an express provision for constituting a central authority for the purpose of exercising the powers and functions of the central government under the Act. In presence of this provision, the Government of India constituted the Narcotics Control Bureau in 1986. The Bureau, subject to the supervision and control of the central government, is to exercise the powers and functions of the central government for measures with respect to coordination of actions by various offices of the state government and other authorities, implementation of the obligations in respect of countermeasures against illicit traffic, right? So it basically coordinates and goes for various operations with many state forces and other organizations also. Assistance to the concerned authorities in foreign countries, coordination of actions taken by the other concerned ministries, departments, and organizations. This is what you have to understand. The Narcotics Control Bureau is the apex coordinating agency. Now just tell me under which jurisdiction, under which ministry the NCB works. It functions as an enforcement agency through its zonal offices. The offices are located at Agartala and other places. The zonal offices collect and analyze the data related to the seizures of narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances, study trends and other things, how these gangs or how these cartels operate, and then they finally, through various investigation and through various operations, they basically nab these criminals. This is what you need to understand with respect to Narcotics Control Bureau, the ministry and the functions, and what are the international conventions. We have already gone through that, and what is the basis of the NCB, that is the Narcotics, Drug and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985. So here we come at the end of the discussion. I hope this discussion was useful for you. And if you like the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also mention in the comment section. All the very best. Thank you so much.